Hey there, all you cool cats and kittens. Dr. Peterson here with Regions EMS, and it is so good to see me again. You see me again. Whatever. The point is, it's been a while, but we're back like Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I'll admit, probably not the most optimistic comparison I could choose, but here we are nonetheless. So, how are things? How have you been? You been good? We've got a lot to catch up on today, but don't worry, we won't do it all at once. I like to keep things manageable. So to ease back into our Regions EMS update routine, we'll be recycling a segment on carbon monoxide poisoning, bring you as much from the news desk as I think I can handle, and of course, this wouldn't be a 2020 update video without something about COVID-19. So hit your out of service button, grab some of that leftover coffee from the previous shift, and stay tuned for the 3 things you need to know. I figure we should probably address the elephant in the room right away. I remember hearing about this novel coronavirus back in December or January and thinking that this would probably play out like the original SARS virus or the MERS respiratory virus, which never really hit the United States. Well, clearly things got real pretty quickly. We've been relatively spared here in Minnesota and western Wisconsin to this point, but it seems like there's still quite a ways to go before this is behind us. Right now, we're at 7 million confirmed cases in the United States with 200,000 deaths. That's roughly a 3% mortality rate for positive cases. In Minnesota, we're at about 100,000 cases with 2,000 deaths, so our local mortality rate is slightly lower than the national average. Western Wisconsin, I'm once again lumping you in with Minnesota's data, and in return, freely concede the current superiority of the Green Bay Packers. It's also important to keep the numbers in context. Although more younger people may be infected with COVID, 90 to 95% of the deaths are occurring in people over the age of 65. For those at risk, this is truly not something to be taken lightly and cannot be compared to any influenza outbreak from the last 100 years. Unfortunately, this situation has also become extremely polarizing and political, which really fogs up the science and the data. For that reason, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do, what to expect, or give you definitive answers to any of your burning COVID questions. Instead, I'd like to talk about the human side of this pandemic. Although mask wearing and social distancing is probably saving lives, it goes against some of our very basic human needs for connection and contact with each other. I don't have any solutions for this, but we need to be aware of this issue when we interact with patients and family members. For some, a trip to the hospital means they might end up in a nursing home and never be able to hold the hand of their spouse again because of the visitor restrictions. I have a family member in this exact situation right now, so this is real for me. David Kim is a New Jersey paramedic and former photographer who found himself on the front line of the outbreak on the East Coast. He was asked by Time to document some of his experience, which I think adds a much-needed human perspective to our current situation. Check out his story.
Working as a provider and also working as a photographer at the same time, I was asking myself really deep questions like, who am I? Like, what's my purpose in this historic moment? Conflicting thoughts of oh, I'm a provider and also I'm a photographer. It's like, which one am I? So I'm about to grab my camera right now. One call we went on for someone who was having difficulty breathing. And then on the way there, we heard the EMTs were already doing CPR. And I already knew that, this was, from the way things are going, we were going to pronounce this person dead. what was really different about pronouncing people during this pandemic is wearing all this plastic PPE gear. I'm just like this completely sealed figure saying like, hey, your father's dead, and it's just like, it just, for me, it comes off like very cold. Working inside the hospital, the shifts are 12 hours long, and the beginning of the shift between like 7 p.m. till about like 1 a.m. is pretty quiet, and then after about 3 a.m. that's when, you know, people start getting really sick and start being intubated or going into cardiac arrest. One thing I learned in my darkness during this whole thing was like, oh, like I'm kind of a control freak. And I think that really translates into the work we do as paramedics, nurses, and doctors. It's like we try to prevent death. I mean, what's more controlling than that? Two of my coworkers, they got admitted to the hospital because they tested positive for the virus. A lot of the questions that I was asking myself, I was asking my coworkers on camera. How long have you been a paramedic? Why do you do this?
Ever since I was a kid, I feel like a calling to help humanity. I became an EMT, fell in love with the rush. You know, I liked being able to come and have someone in an emergency and then be able to do an intervention and then have an immediate response to that.
I really felt compelled to do this because as more and more people get sick, like my coworkers, like I really want our voices to be heard.
We all have a role, I think. Somebody's got to be a ditch digger, somebody's got to be a bricklayer, wherever the right fit is. And I think I just fit here. It just works for me.
Right now she is also COVID positive.
I question, is this all really worth it for me to potentially get sick, potentially bring it home to my wife, and so on and so forth? Like, were there any moments where you're like, why am I doing this job? Is it worth it?
I mean, I've never had a moment where I was like, oh, I don't want to be an EMT anymore, but there have been moments where I've gotten really nervous about the whole effect this virus can put me and my family in danger as well.
Being sick right now, like, do you have any regrets or?
No regrets whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm sad that I got sick. I really didn't expect to. I'm hoping that as soon as I recover, that I have some immunity, because that would be a great asset to be able to get back in the front line and give some break to people. That would be something I'm looking forward to.
I definitely value my job as a paramedic a lot more going through this. I felt like this assignment was very important, and I really hope the work that I did, both as a paramedic and as a photographer, is going to give something back.
So let's just say that it might start getting cold around here. I know, but let's just say, through the wonders of modern science and fire, most of us tend to stay plenty warm. But when science fails us or common sense doesn't prevail, carbon monoxide can become a real threat. Now, to make sure we're all on the same page, let's watch this quick video to explain some of the facts behind carbon monoxide poisoning. Check this out.
Carbon monoxide poisoning is a very scary thing, because unless you have a detector in your house, you would never know it's around. It has no smell and no color, and as little as 0.32% of air concentration is enough to kill you. Before we get started, if you're unsure of the difference between carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, it's the number of oxygen atoms bound to the carbon. Carbon dioxide contains 2 oxygen atoms, while carbon monoxide only has 1. When you inhale, oxygen moves down your trachea into your lungs and into small sacs called alveoli. Blood flows around the alveoli in very small vessels called capillaries. These blood vessels are 5 to 10 micrometers thick, and for comparison, a human hair is 5 times thicker than a capillary. Oxygen molecules flow from the alveoli into the blood vessels. Red blood cells then pick up the oxygen by binding them to a protein called hemoglobin. In total, 4 oxygens bind to one hemoglobin protein. Your red blood cells then flow through the rest of your body and release the oxygen into your tissues to generate energy. And here's how carbon monoxide disrupts this system. Once inhaled, the carbon monoxide fills your lungs, diffuses through your capillaries, and binds to the hemoglobin protein. But it doesn't just bind, it binds 230 times stronger than oxygen, meaning it never comes off. Only 2 carbon monoxide molecules can bind to the hemoglobin protein, so there is room for 2 other oxygen molecules. However, once the carbon monoxide molecules bind to the hemoglobin, it changes its shape, making the other 2 oxygen molecules permanently bound. So, the red blood cell never releases the oxygen or carbon monoxide molecules, and as a result, tissues become hypoxic and the body begins to starve of oxygen. At 0.01% carbon monoxide concentration in the air, the first symptom is onset of a mild headache due to lower oxygen levels in the brain. At 0.08% concentration, severe headache, dizziness, and minor muscular convulsions become more prominent. Convulsions are caused by muscles running low on oxygen. By 0.16% air concentration, fatigue, dizziness, and convulsions become more severe. The individual's heart rate increases because the body is so low on oxygen that it tries to compensate by pumping more blood to the brain and organs. By 0.32% concentration, all oxygen resources are sent to the brain. Convulsions become borderline seizure as the muscles are now starved of oxygen and have exhausted all their anaerobic metabolites. Major fatigue sets in and the individual becomes unconscious. Soon, the brain itself will have no oxygen supplies, at which point it will briefly switch to anaerobic metabolism. Finally, the person dies of brain death within 20 to 30 minutes. So where does carbon monoxide come from, and how do you avoid it? Oxygen tends to be less abundant in wood-burning stoves, internal combustion engines, and furnaces with airflow that's blocked. In fact, this is where most people die from carbon monoxide poisoning, because the blocked airflow creates an oxygen-starved environment which produces more carbon monoxide. This is why it's such a big deal to have a working carbon monoxide detector in your home.
Since carbon monoxide is invisible, when should we think about it? Well, right now is prime time as people fire up their furnaces after a very short summer hiatus, especially if their intake or exhaust vents haven't been cleaned thoroughly. Ice fishing shelters are another potential source, especially if the generator or heat source is venting directly into the shelter. And finally, during a natural disaster or a power outage, some people feel that it's a good idea to run a generator or a gas grill in their garage. Of course we all know better, but it still happens. And also, since carbon monoxide fills the entire structure, anytime you respond to a call where there's people with similar symptoms in the same household, it would be something to consider. We've seen it before, and we'll definitely see it again. Let's talk about treatment options. The treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning is oxygen. Lots and lots of oxygen. Since carbon monoxide molecules bind competitively with oxygen on hemoglobin, we can overcome that competitive bind by overwhelming the carbon monoxide with lots and lots of oxygen molecules. At a minimum, this should probably involve a non-rebreather mask, which gets us about 80 to 90% oxygen delivery for most patients. A nasal cannula tops out in the mid-30s in most cases, so if we truly need 100% oxygen delivery, intubation is probably the way to go. For significant carbon monoxide exposures, hyperbaric chambers are the best treatment option, which is why we generally recommend transport directly to Hennepin County Medical Center if the patient's RAD57 reading is over 20% and they are either altered or hemodynamically unstable and carbon monoxide poisoning is the only concern. Hyperbaric chambers, in addition to supplying 100% oxygen, increase the atmospheric pressure of pure oxygen, which condenses more oxygen molecules into a smaller volume. This is much more effective at displacing the carbon monoxide molecules and restoring hemoglobin to its normal state more quickly than other forms of oxygen delivery. Now, some of you have asked about CPAP for carbon monoxide victims. It's a good idea, but CPAP doesn't function the same way that hyperbaric chambers do. CPAP is effective at increasing the force of the air supplied to the victim, but it doesn't condense oxygen molecules the same way that a hyperbaric chamber would. CPAP devices usually have a mask that provides a much better seal than traditional non-rebreather masks, which allows for more efficient delivery of oxygen. But a big problem is that many of the single-use CPAP devices are not capable of delivering 100% oxygen. Check the device that your agency uses before you consider this as a treatment option. The last thing I'd like to mention is that there's been some emphasis recently on the use of SCBA during the overhaul phase of fire suppression, or at least the use of ambient air monitoring. That's fine, but it doesn't help you on a medical call. There are several devices out on the market that clip onto your first in bag that will alarm if the ambient CO level exceeds a safe threshold. Hello, I'm Dr. Peterson, and this is a Regions EMS update. 6 months ago, it seemed like information was changing daily. We did our best to provide you with up-to-date medical guidance to help you sort through all of the opinions and panic that seem to be everywhere. Well, things have settled down a bit, but we definitely are in a resurgence. We are no longer producing our daily COVID updates, but we still have a large number of resources posted to the COVID-19 resource page on our website at regionsems.com. It has everything from how to deal with distressed family members when responding to a COVID-19 related call, a handout for patients, and information on antibody testing, in addition to many more documents and links. As the call numbers start to climb again, it might be worth a quick look-see to refresh your knowledge. There are several hospital updates that you will want to know about. First, any patient who gets ketamine for behavioral sedation should have a stabroom requested to make sure that they receive a timely evaluation at the receiving hospital. These patients should never be left alone or in an unmonitored bed. Second, ECMO is back at Regions. It actually has been for some time, so hopefully this isn't new information. Key reminders are to call the ECMO team as soon as you can to mobilize resources, preferably after the first shock. Once you get moving, the team has also requested that you cut off the patient's pants if you can, as it saves critical time in the ED. Many lives have been saved through this ECMO program, and Dr. Yiannopoulos is in the process of publishing the initial results in a very prominent medical journal. So the world is going to take notice of our work right here in Minnesota. And finally, I'm sure many of you have heard the news that St. Joseph's will be closing its ED at the start of the new year. This is really unfortunate, and we can only guess what impact that will have on the other East Metro hospitals. One immediate change to note is that St. Joseph's no longer has orthopedic trauma coverage. This even includes hip fractures. Although there is no regional designation for orthopedic trauma, you can use the trauma triage and destination plan in our guidelines to help determine if a higher level of trauma center is appropriate for your patient. And also know that patients are likely to be transferred to another facility if they seek treatment at St. Joseph's for an orthopedic injury. Well, that's it from the studio. We'll see you back here next month. That will do it for our first episode back from quarantine. Hopefully we can settle into a routine again as we try to navigate social distancing and how that affects our production process. We do plan to bring back more clinical topics and high-value education. So now more than ever, click on the subscribe buttons for our social media channels to stay informed on our latest news and updates. We hope to take this show on the road again and visit some of your stations for future episodes. So stay tuned and let us know what you'd like to see in future episodes. For our team at Regions EMS, I'm Dr. Peterson. Stay smart, stay safe, and stay healthy. And of course, stay professional too.